In this video, I'm going to be giving you some clear guidelines as to how you can write the perfect essay, especially in philosophy, but generally in any subject in the humanities. My name is James, and I've been teaching philosophy in European universities for over 10 years now, at both an undergraduate and a graduate level. And I've published numerous articles of my own, which you can see on my Google Scholar profile, but I've also published my own book with Cambridge University Press. So I have some experience in what it takes to write the perfect essay. And during this time, I've discovered that many students seem to find writing an essay to be a really mysterious and vague task. So what I want to do here in this video is basically to break it down, because I believe that anyone can write a great essay if they just have these simple tips. Although what I'm going to say in this video is specifically tailored for undergraduate students, many of the principles that I'm going to lay out apply equally well to graduate essays, to bachelor's theses, master's theses, and also to PhD dissertations. These are simple principles for organizing your writing in a clear and orderly manner and communicating your ideas on paper or on a screen, as the case may be. So yeah, hopefully whatever your level is, you'll be able to get something out of this video. For me, one of the great tragedies of a university education is that it's often the best students with the best ideas who struggle to communicate those ideas the most. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is give you the tools you need to communicate those golden ideas to your audience, to your lecturer, to the person marking your paper. So if you like this kind of content, please click like and subscribe, because that's a great help and will help my channel grow and I can make more videos like this. Before students even pick up a pen, I recommend that they think about the bigger picture. What is an essay and what is it trying to achieve? I think the best way to think about the bigger picture, the overall purpose or function of an essay, is to think of it as a type of legal case, as a kind of battle. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince the jury, i.e. the person or people marking your paper, of your particular standpoint, of your claim and way of seeing the world. So this means that you have to state your case, you have to state what it is that you're arguing for, but you also have to bring forth evidence that is going to clearly and calmly convince the jury of your particular hypothesis. On this note, also with regard to the bigger picture, it is important to remember kind of how essays fit into the university ecosystem. So what is usually the case is your lecturer, the person marking your papers, will have a huge pile of papers, if not only from your class, also from multiple other classes. And it will be summer or their Christmas break, and they will be having to get through these papers. And a lot of them will go over the same material. And as much as your lecturer will love reading your paper, you have to remember that they're not going to be able to spend so much time dedicating their cognitive energy to divining your meaning. So again, the important thing is to be clear and communicative when you're writing your paper, and to be sympathetic to the marker and to understand what kind of situation they're in. One of the first rules of writing generally is to know your audience, so try to bear this in mind. I tend to say that with a good essay, you should be able to read it out loud and convince any educated person that they should understand the ideas in your paper and be able to comprehend them and talk about them with you after you've presented the paper. Okay, so now we've looked at some of the big picture preliminaries, it's time to move on to the concrete planning for your paper. So you've got your assignment and you now need to write the paper. So the first thing to do is to think about timing. So I'm going to write this down so we have a clear list that you can refer back to. I often think that writing a paper is like baking a cake. Much of the hard work goes into the preparation and the punctuality. If you can get all those lined up, then the actual kind of baking of the cake is relatively straightforward. And one of the key components of this is really timing. You need to make sure that you leave sufficient time to think about your paper, to do the literature review, and to write the paper, and then to polish and proofread it. So I tend to think that a good rule of thumb is about 1 week for every 1,000 words. So if you have a paper of 2,000 words, then 2 weeks, and half of this time will be for doing the literature review and the essay plan, and then half of it will be for writing. The second task in the planning phase is going to be picking a topic. Now, this phase really depends on the nature of your assignment. Perhaps you've been set a fixed essay question, in which case you don't need to worry about this part at all. But perhaps you have been given a range of essay questions that you can possibly answer. You need to pick one. Or you've been given total free rein and you need to formulate your own essay question. Now, if you're in either of these two latter categories, so you have to pick your own from a series of options, or you've got totally free rein, then this is going to be an important step in the process. My first recommendation in this regard would be to pick something that you really enjoy. Pick the topic that is closest to your heart and your interests. And the reason I say this is because it's going to make the reading and writing a whole lot more easy, because you are going to be pulled through by your natural interest in the topic, and this is going to make it far more effortless. At the same time, my second recommendation is that you need to make sure you are picking a topic that hasn't been covered too extensively, that there isn't too much literature, let's say, or that there isn't too little literature. You need to make sure that the topic allows for a good original paper to be written on it. The third stage, now that you've set your timing, you've picked your topic, is to begin with the literature review. Now, for the literature review, what you want to do is you want to go into your university library and pick all the books off the shelves that are vaguely associated with your topic. Sit down, go through the contents pages, go through the indexes, and try to find chapters and articles focused on your topic. And try to pick a range of papers that are a bit older, and try to pick a range that are a bit newer as well. And of course, you will need to pick primary texts if you're working in, say, the history of philosophy, or you're working on a specific thinker or set of thinkers. So you're going to need to kind of collect all of the possible texts that you're going to have to work with. Another way of doing this, of course, is online. So definitely look at Google Scholar, look at Phil Papers, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I would also recommend checking out Wikipedia. I tend not to advise students to quote from Wikipedia. It is not as kind of forbidden to quote from Wikipedia as it once was, but nonetheless, I think it's safest to avoid that, but it's still a great way of finding references and literature and generally getting an overview of the topic. So use all of these resources and then collate some PDFs on your computer of chapters and articles, and collate some hard copies of articles and books and book chapters, and get them all in front of you. So I would say a good rule of thumb for, say, a 4,000 word paper is to begin with about 15 focused pieces of literature. So you want to be reading about 15 articles or chapters. Maybe you can go up to like 25 or so, but certainly 15 is a good starting point. Something else important that you should be doing as you go through the literature review is really looking at the papers, at the chapters themselves, and seeing how they're formatted, what kind of language they use. Do they use many adjectives? Do they use many footnotes? Do they use lots of quotations? Do they use block quotations? How are they indented? So basically just looking at the appearance of the articles and the kind of language that's used. Because what you want to be doing is basically imitating or aping one of the papers that are more recently published on this topic, because that kind of sets a gold standard for how your treatment should look. So now you've got your 15 to 25 papers, chapters, books in front of you. What you now need to do is read. And that might sound straightforward, but I think it's really important to remember that if you want to embed this information and really like combine it in a way that's going to lead to a creative, perfect essay, then you need to take notes and to process this information by annotating, by using colored post-its in books to mark relevant passages, and on papers try writing in the margins as well. And another idea is which is one that I use, is to just get an A4 block of lined paper and to take notes, and with the page numbers, and we just try to summarize the argument in each paragraph as you go through, or at least to pick out passages that are pertinent to your essay topic. You can also use a word processor such as Google Docs or Microsoft Word, for example, but there is empirical evidence that handwriting notes embeds knowledge much better. So if you really want to creatively engage with the material, I would definitely suggest taking handwritten notes. Now that you've done the literature review, you've read through 15 to 25 chapters, papers, and so on, it's time to move on to the problem formulation. So this is number 4. The problem formulation is one of the most important parts of the essay preparation process, because this is really like the acorn and your essay is going to be like the oak tree. Your problem formulation motivates the whole of your analysis. And so it's essential that you find a good problem formulation. This can be an iterative process. So sometimes you find one, you realize it doesn't work a bit further down the line, and then you can come back and rework it and write a different problem formulation. So how does one actually go about finding a problem? Well, in short, what you want to be looking for while you're doing the literature review are things that strike you as strange. So there will be things, hopefully, that jump out at you and you're just like, that doesn't sound right. Or, that's weird. The other person that I was reading said that, and this person's saying this. There seems to be some kind of clash or conflict that hasn't been observed in the literature before. Or perhaps you find that there's a contradiction within the texts written by a single author. Or maybe you find that there's a tension between what you've seen in empirical literature, let's say in psychology, maybe you're studying psychology, and you can see that philosophers are talking about something that clearly doesn't fit with other empirical literature that you've worked on. Or maybe it just doesn't fit with your intuitions. So maybe it's kind of grossly at odds with how you see the world and how you think your friends see the world. This is all good material for your problem formulation. As you've probably already guessed, your problem formulation should not be too obvious. You want to find a problem that is a little bit new and unexpected if possible. Now, of course, if you have been set an essay question or you've been given a range of essay questions already, then the problem is already made for you by the lecturer. So then you don't have to worry about this step at all. The problem formulation is specifically for people that need to pick their own topic. However, when you have been given a question, you will still need to expand upon why that question is problematic. Why is it important? And this is all part of the problem formulation. And what is the purpose of the problem formulation? Well, the purpose of the problem formulation is to get the reader engaged in your argument. You need to show them that there is something problematic out there. For anyone interested in this topic, here is a kind of a conflict. Here is something that doesn't work out. There's an incoherence. There's a glitch in the machine. There's a bug, if you like. And so what you're going to do is you're going to show how that bug can be repaired, or you're going to describe the nature of that bug. And for anyone that is interested in the machine, i.e. the discipline or the subdiscipline of philosophy that you're focusing on, they're going to be like, oh, I hadn't noticed that glitch before, or I had noticed it and no one's resolved it before. But if they use the machine, if they're engaged in the machine, then they're really going to want to see it solved. And this is going to kind of grab their interest from the outset, and then they're going to really understand where you're coming from. So it's important to frame your argument in relation to this problem formulation. Another way to find problems is to discuss the literature that you're reading or your topic in general with other people. And this is why, again, it can be really great if you're studying a topic that you're interested in, because you'll be more eager and ready to talk about it with other people. And then they might actually kind of be like, that's weird, that doesn't fit with this. And then you can follow that up. And then what you'll be doing in your paper is trying to show how these tensions, glitches, how they can be better described, better conceived, better conceptualized and resolved. Before we move on, another important consideration is to make sure you pick a problem that's suited to the size of your essay. So you're not going to be able to solve the mind-body problem in 2,000 words. Be careful not to bite off more than you can chew. If you have longer papers, obviously this means you can pack a little bit more in, but it's generally difficult to keep the word limit down in your paper. So always go for too small rather than too big. And this is one reason I tend to discourage students from writing comparative papers unless they have a lot of word space. So especially try not to compare 3 thinkers. At most compare 2, because you just can't cover 3 thinkers in any comprehensive detail in 4,000 words. This isn't a hard and fast rule, and it still means you can bring in many other thinkers, but just try to think about what you can cover, what you can answer sufficiently in the space that you've been given. This brings us to the fifth step in the planning process, and this is the hypothesis formulation or the claim formulation. So I'll write this down. Let's write claim formulation. The claim formulation is going to be the claim that you are going to defend over the course of the essay. It is the point that you are trying to provide evidence for and to convince your reader of. And for this reason, your claim needs to be expressible as a declarative statement. So in this essay, I am going to defend X, where X is the thing that you are going to try to persuade your reader of. Another thing that one should avoid is being too vague or too open with the claim. So simply saying, in this paper, I'm going to argue that critics need to pay more attention to X. This is not concrete enough. This is way too open. So it needs to be a little bit more kind of closed and specific. So in this paper, I'm going to argue that critics should pay more attention to X because it has serious practical consequences if we don't pay attention to X, for example. So you need to make sure that the claim is, specific and clear and actually defending something that is a proper statement and idea. Now you've got your problem and you've got your claim. The sixth phase is to gather evidence. Now, in this stage, what you're essentially going to do is go back to the literature review, and you're going to look back through your notes, you're going to go back through your annotations, go back to your post-it notes, and you're going to see if you can find evidence for your claim. And what you want to do is you want to collate all of these citations, all of these notes, copy and paste them from PDFs into one document, and then you've got all of your evidence kind of gathered. Also, when you're gathering evidence, gather counter evidence as well, because when you represent your opponent in the first sections of your paper, because you're going to have to talk about what kind of literature has already been discussed, you want to have nice quotations that illustrate your opponent's point. So don't just gather evidence for your own position, but also gather some evidence that will help you reconstruct opposed views and help you do a good literature survey when you're actually writing the paper. The reason that it's important to gather evidence in support of the opposed views is you really want to avoid straw manning your opponent. The straw man fallacy is when you represent the opposed view that you want to overturn in your paper, if there is an opposed view, and you represent it in a really weak way. So you imagine you've got an effigy or a scarecrow of your opponent and you've kind of stuffed it with straw. But this isn't your real opponent. This is a fake puppet, a kind of empty effigy, as I was saying. So what you really want to do is make an ironclad, a stronger version of your opponent if possible. Because if you can give the most charitable reading of your opponent and you can still take them down, then this shows that you really have got something solid, and it will mean that people that are critical of your view at first will be especially convinced. If you've represented the opposed view as strongly as possible, then people will be like, wow, this person really has given their opponent a good chance. Once you've gathered all of your evidence, it's time to structure that evidence into a plan. So this is the seventh stage, and this is writing a plan. So the plan is going to be a separate document, and you are going to begin at the top of your document by writing problem formulation. That's going to be the first point. Then you're going to have your claim, and then you're going to have section by section breakdowns of kind of what you're going to be arguing as you go through your paper. So it needs to have the argumentative construction. And the subsections of your paper, those are going to be numbered. So you've got your problem, your claim, and then you've got section 1, section 2, section 3. I would say don't have more than 4 sections in a short paper. It can start getting a little bit confusing. So try to have kind of 3 or 4 main sections, and each of these sections should have a subclaim. So let's say, for example, that you are going to argue that in the ethics of cosmetic surgery, commentators use the adjective cosmetic in conflicting ways. So one person uses it to refer to this kind of thing, another uses it to refer to that kind of thing, and that there's some confusion, and that this has negative practical repercussions. So this would be your problem formulation. There's some confusion, has negative repercussions. Your claim would then be, I'm going to formulate a much better definition, and it's not going to have those practical repercussions. It's going to have practical advantages. So that would be your claim. Now, what you're going to need to show in terms of sections, in section 1, you want to show there is confusion in the literature, that this term is used in conflicting ways. Section 2 would then be to show these are the practical repercussions of those confusions. Section 3, you would then be outlining your own definition. So your claim would be, this is an alternative definition that gives coherence to the notion of cosmetic surgery. And then your final section would then outline the practical advantages. So the claim of that final section would be, my particular definition is practically superior to the previous definitions. So as you can see, this would be a kind of clear logical structure to justify your claim that this alternative definition is better and clearer, more coherent, and has practical advantages. So then what you need to do is you need to go through and add the evidence that you're going to cite in each of these sections to your plan. So you have a kind of overview of what claims, subclaims you are defending in each section, and what evidence you're going to cite to support those claims. This will give you a clear view of whether the argument all hangs together. And if it's not coherent, certainly don't panic. In fact, it's best if you find that it's incoherent at this stage when you're just writing a plan, because then you can go back, you can adapt it, you can go back to your problem formulation stage, you can gather new evidence and revise your essay plan. And so what you really want to do by the end of the essay plan is to have a really clear framework, structure, narrative of how your essay is going to look, because then all you need to do is basically fill in the gaps. So the planning stage consists of checking the timing, picking a topic that you're interested in and that's practically going to work. Third, the literature review. Fourth, the problem formulation. Fifth, the claim formulation. Sixth, gathering evidence. Seventh, writing a plan. So once you've gone through all of these stages, you're then going to be ready to actually write a draft of your paper. There are two ways of going about writing a draft. Let's call them two different writing strategies. The first way is to write really polished sentences first off. So you work really hard to make sure each sentence reads really well and articulates your ideas kind of first time. And this is great because it means you then don't have to do much proofreading. However, the other method, which is the method that I prefer, is to write much more loosely and to write a very rough draft. So basically what you're doing is you are collecting all the evidence, you're structuring the evidence, but you're basically writing as you might speak. So you're writing quickly and you're trying to connect up all of the dots of evidence to create the big picture of your essay. Now, the advantage of this method is that you can see whether things hang together as you go along. And if things don't quite hang together by the end, then you haven't invested too much time in polishing the individual sentences. So you can kind of delete things, move things around. And then when you have everything just in place, then you can really go about polishing. As I've said, I think this is the way to go, this more rough approach, because it allows your paper to be a bit more organic, a bit more adaptive, and will make it seem tighter in the end. Let's now go through the various structural components that your essay needs to fulfill in order to be complete. So the first one right at the top is the title. So number one, title. Your title should really encapsulate what is going on in your essay. So it needs to communicate to the reader what it is you are dealing with. It might even describe what the actual argument is to a certain extent. So, for example, I've written papers called, Nietzsche on the necessity of repression. And so what I'm arguing in that paper, obviously, is that Nietzsche, the philosopher, thinks that under certain circumstances, repression is necessary. This is a super simple, descriptive, not very elegant title, but it kind of does the job and it tells you what's in the tin, so to speak. So, imagine you're walking around a kind of hardware store and you want to buy some varnish to revarnish a table or something. You want to make sure that you know what you're getting inside the tin when you read the label on the outside of the tin. You don't want to get home and realize that you've got some super dark varnish when you thought you had a light varnish. So your essay title is essentially a label for your paper, and it should tell the reader, what they're going to get. As well as being descriptive, you also get titles that are witty or elegant, that make a bit of a pun. So for example, one of the most cited papers in computer science, and in fact one of the most cited papers in general, I think of the last 10 years, is simply called "Attention is All You Need." And this is obviously a riff on the Beatles tune, "All You Need Is Love." But it's kind of witty and draws the reader in. It's got a kind of clever edge to it. But do make sure that you pick a nice, clean title that sounds attractive, because it's going to be the first thing that your reader, the person marking your paper, is going to experience and interact with in your essay. When you've got your title in order, it is time to write your introduction. So, introduction. Your introduction is going to be serving a very specific purpose, and it's really good to keep this in mind when you're putting your introduction together. So basically what it is doing is it's trying to draw the reader in. You are asking for the reader's attention. They're going to be giving you some of their time. They're going to be giving you some of their mental energy. And you want to basically tell them why they should give that to you. And to, lure them in, to seduce them into your essay. I like to think of this as a bit like being at a circus and you've got someone stood outside the circus tent saying kind of roll up, come on in, and they're trying to kind of get punters into the tent. And that's essentially what you're doing in the introduction. So how do you get someone to actually devote their attention to your essay? Well, essentially what you're doing is trying to create a hook to draw them in. And there are some principles with regard to hooking people in the context of academia and communicating ideas. The first thing is that you want to show that you have expertise and authority, that you are familiar with the topics at hand. Nobody wants to read a paper written by someone who hasn't read any of the literature. That's a bad start. So one of the things you want to be doing generally in your introduction is showcasing the fact that you are familiar with the topic. In order to show that you are familiar with the topic, you need to make sure you are citing the right authors and that you are summarizing debates in your introduction in a way that shows that you are conversant in the relevant topics. The second main way of hooking someone is by offering them something of value. So this goes with being authoritative, but the value part is really the kind of bait on the hook that's going to get the person to bite. So the value of your paper is really going to be illuminated in the problem formulation and your claim formulation. So you really want to say why the problem that you're dealing with is a problem and why the person should read it, given that they are someone that is interested in the topic. So impress the urgency, the importance of your particular problem. Then you want to show that your claim is going to solve this problem, but not to spell out everything about the claim. You really just want to say, this is going to be a robust claim, it's going to be well defended, and you're going to see why I have resolved this problem. Another fact that it's helpful to bear in mind when you're writing your introduction is that many markers will have already decided your grade when they complete your introduction. And you'll only be able to kind of get it to go up or down a little bit throughout the rest of the essay usually. So you really want to make sure you've written a good and strong introduction. What your introduction should actually look like in a paragraph by paragraph sense is it should be the problem formulation in the first paragraph, your claim formulation in the second paragraph and outlining a little bit about your claim, and then the third paragraph or subsection of your introduction should be a kind of outline of your argument. So going through step by step, saying in section 1, I'm going to begin by arguing X. In section 2, I'm then going to contend that Y. Yada, 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 until you get to your conclusion, where you'll say, by way of conclusion, I'm going to look at some of the practical repercussions and lines of for future research. So I would certainly recommend paying attention to the structure of the introductions in your literature review. So the papers that you're going to be taking as a model, have a look at how they are structured. This will give you a key to how you can fine-tune your own introduction. The next step is your main body. So that's number 3, main body. Now, in the main body, you are going to be presenting your case, and you want to follow the structure, the narrative structure outlined in your essay plan. You want to keep in mind the particular subclaim that you're going to be defending in each section. And what you want to do is you want to present evidence, textual evidence, empirical evidence that really is going to justify each of those subclaims. And then, make sure that you communicate to your reader very clearly how you're moving from one section to the next. Spelling out what you're doing and saying, in this section, we've seen that X, let us now take a look at Y, and then you start the next section. This is called signposting. And although it can often seem quite vulgar, a little bit unpoetic perhaps, it really helps readers that don't have much time see what your argument is and see how it's all slotting together and really see the links and connections that bind the various portions of your narrative together. The first section of your main body should usually be summarizing the state of the art, the literature that pertains to your topic. So if there is an opposed position, you want to be reconstructing that and using citations, quotations perhaps as well. And if there are already existing positions that are similar to your own, really do make sure you acknowledge those and you distinguish your own position from those views. And you can do that later when you're laying out your own claim and your own position, but make sure that you are reconstructing the relevant literature in a way that seems kind of logical and feeds into your overarching argument. As soon as you finish the draft of your main body, it's time to move on to the conclusion. So this is number 4, conclusion. By the end of your paper, your reader is likely going to be a little bit disoriented because you've been presenting various different sub-arguments in the various different sections. Maybe there have been some little digressions, although keep those to a minimum. So this doesn't mean that you should copy and paste the summary of your argument from your introduction, but you do want to recapitulate what you've done over the course of the essay and to reiterate how you've demonstrated your claim. Another thing that you can do in your conclusion is to outline some of the things you haven't been able to talk about. You can't discuss everything in your essay, so it's perfectly acceptable to have occluded some particular aspects of the discussion, and you can explicitly say this so that your reader isn't left thinking at the end, why didn't they mention this or that? So you can say why you didn't cover it, and just make sure you explain this clearly so that then you won't be penalized for missing out certain aspects of the relevant debates. Another thing that your conclusion should be doing is explaining what lines of future research have been opened up by your analysis. So for example, let's think of the cosmetic surgery toy case that I mentioned earlier. You could say, oh, well, this shows that we need to survey surgeons to see how they are actually using the term cosmetic in practice. So this might be a task for people working in linguistics, for example. So in this way, you present your paper as opening up a new horizon of different options for study. And this can really give the reader a great sense that you've empowered them. You haven't closed off the topic. Rather, what you've done in your analysis is open up a whole new kind of area of study, a kind of field of interest. So really try to bring this out in your conclusion. Okay, so now you have finished your conclusion, you can go back and rewrite your introduction, and you can generally polish your whole paper. At this point, I would say make sure you don't have too many footnotes in your paper, if you're using footnotes at all. Footnotes can be good when used in moderation, but generally footnotes indicate a digression. So if something doesn't fit in the main body of your essay, it's probably best just to delete it altogether. The next thing you need to do is your reference list. So this is number 5. There's going to be a heading and it's going to say references. And again, you should be able to see this in the articles that you work on in your literature review. And your reference list basically is the full reference for each of the citations that are in your main body. You don't want to have more and you don't want to have less. So for every quotation, for every date that you have when you refer to a text, you want to have a full reference. And this is to enable the reader to find the book or article that you're referring to. They want to be able to check the evidence that you're providing them. In order to write a good reference list, you need to use a style guide. And a style guide will generally tell you all of the kind of formatting rules for a paper in your discipline. I generally work with the Chicago Manual of Style. I think that's a good starting point in philosophy. So check with your tutor, with your lecturer, which style guide is kind of best for your area. This will probably be stipulated in the syllabus, but in any event, you want to get the style guide, and this will tell you how to formulate each of your references. And then you need to make sure you really follow it to the letter so that your paper is formatted in a consistent way. And this will make it look really tidy, and it will look like you've put the necessary effort into your essay. These are easy points. You can really bump your grade up simply by doing the references neatly and by formatting your paper correctly, making sure block quotes are kind of indented and this kind of thing. So yeah, don't miss a trick and drop points here. It's this doesn't require creative thinking. It's really just prosaic, just going through the steps. So yeah, do this perhaps when you're not feeling so creative. This is a really good thing to do when you're just at the end of the day. You don't want to do anything too taxing. You may also be expected to write an abstract for your paper. This generally goes underneath the title of your paper and before the introduction. And this should be usually about 250 words, and it should summarize your paper. You don't always have to write these for student papers, so only write one if you're expected to write one. But basically what they should do is just, summarize, give a foretaste of what your paper's about. So you really want your problem formulation, your hypothesis, and a breakdown of your argument, and that should be it. And it's okay to copy and paste some material from the introduction if need be. So you've got your whole paper now, and basically all you need to do is trim the loose ends and make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. So what I recommend is going through your paper and reading it out loud. So print it out, get it on your iPad or something, and then just read it out. And it's very easy to skip over typos and mistakes when you're just scanning with your eyes. So when you read it out, you'll be able to hear the mistakes and they'll kind of jump out at you. Another option is to get your computer to read the essay out loud. This can be a bit weird. You get a bit of a Stephen Hawking robotic voice, but I think it can also work. So definitely try that out. And really read through the whole thing. So go back through your reference list and just make sure everything is well polished. Also, make sure that the line spacing is correct. This again should be stipulated somewhere in your course documents, but I would say as a default, go for double spacing. It can look a bit ugly, but it really is much nicer to read for your lecturer. And it's totally the norm in philosophy to submit papers that are double spaced. And insert page numbers. This is essential. Do not forget to put page numbers into your paper. And the reason for this is that when your lecturer is taking notes and putting your grade together and writing you feedback, is they want to say, on page 4, you argue this, and they just can't do that if you've forgotten to put page numbers in. So yeah, don't miss those out, I would say. Once you've proofread your paper, you are good to go. Maybe proofread your paper twice though, as a kind of last recommendation, and make sure you submit it in time, of course, and in the right fashion, because sometimes you need to submit 2 copies. Sometimes it's 1 hard copy with a secretary. Sometimes it's a digital copy online. Sometimes it's anonymized, sometimes it's with your name, your student number. So just make sure you've followed all the guidelines given in the course documents. So there you have it. There is my guide to writing the perfect essay. If you've enjoyed this material, then please click like and subscribe so that I can make more videos on this topic. I'm going to make a video on how to write a bachelor's thesis, a master's thesis, and also a PhD dissertation. So stay tuned for those. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And thank you for your attention. I hope to see you soon.